Imagine fighting a species that disregards the laws of biology and scoffs at the fundamental rules of surrender. I witnessed the Vahn Empire, a power that once dominated 1,000 systems, be reduced to ash by a handful of mammals who simply refused to stay buried. They aren't the strongest, but they are undeniably the most vengeful. If you want to understand why the universe now fears the shadow of Earth, stay with me until the very last second of this video, because what I'm about to reveal defies all military logic. Before we begin, subscribe to the Zenith Imperium channel so you don't miss our Galactic chronicles. What you hear today will forever change your perception of human fragility. My name is Xylos, and for 3 millennia my people, the Glass Archivists, have recorded the rise and fall of countless civilizations. But nothing, absolutely nothing in our records, prepared us for what happened on Nadir 4. To understand the scale of the humiliation, you must first understand who the Vahn were. They weren't just conquerors, they were gods of systematic warfare. Their technology was built on gravity manipulation and zero-point energy. When the Vahn decided a planet was theirs, resistance usually lasted about as long as a heartbeat. Then they found Earth. Or rather, they stumbled upon a small human mining colony on the fringes of Sector 9. The Vahn's mistake was the same as so many others. They read the biological data and ignored the spirit. They saw creatures of calcium bones and soft skin, dependent on oxygen and fragile sleep cycles. High Commander Vahn, a being of pure energy encased in shimmering chrome armor, laughed when he saw the human defenses. They were just metal fences and kinetic projectiles. Primitives, he said, a footnote in the Empire's history. The initial attack was devastating. The Vahn don't use conventional orbital bombardments, they use gravity anchors. They literally crank up the gravity in specific zones until structures collapse under their own weight. I was there, in an invisible observation probe, documenting the massacre. I watched the city of New Hope be flattened in a matter of minutes. I watched the screams fall silent as the air became too heavy for human lungs to draw. The Vahn declared victory before the first soldier even touched the soil. They sent their chrome legions in to sweep up the remains. That was when the universe learned its first lesson about humanity. Humans don't die when they're supposed to. In the ruins of New Hope, beneath tons of concrete and twisted steel, something began to move. It wasn't machines, and it wasn't reinforcements from other systems. It was the survivors. But they didn't look human anymore. They were covered in gray dust, dried blood, and a fury that burned brighter than any warp drive. Sergeant Elias Thorne was the first to emerge. His lungs should have collapsed, his legs should have been shattered. Instead, he brandished a mining tool, a thermal drill, with the same casual lethality of Vahn wields a plasma sword. The Chrome Legions marched forward with the arrogance of those who have already won. They weren't ready for a rat's war. The humans didn't face them in the open. They turned the ruins into a meat grinder. Thorne and his group of wraiths, as they became known, struck from impossible places. They lunged from crushed ventilation ducts, from impact craters, and from piles of corpses. There was one specific moment that altered the course of my analysis. A Vahn platoon was ambushed in a narrow alleyway. The humans didn't use firearms, they had no ammo. They used their hands. I saw a human miner, his left arm visibly broken, leap onto the back of a Vahn soldier and tear the energy plates right off his armor with a piece of rusted rebar. The Vahn soldier, confused, tried to use his gravitational force to repel the human. The human simply sank his teeth into the synthetic rubber neck of the suit and didn't let go until the life support system failed. That wasn't combat. It was purified vengeance. The Vahn High Commander demanded a report on why the cleanup was taking so long. The response he received was an audio signal captured from a primitive radio frequency. It was Thorne. He wasn't asking for a truce. He wasn't negotiating. He was counting. 1, 2, 10, 20. He was counting the Vahn helmets he had piled in the central square. Irritated, the Vahn decided to unleash their full might. They deployed the Goliaths, 10-meter-tall war machines capable of vaporizing mountains. They surrounded the last human stronghold. Logic dictated that the humans should surrender. Biology dictated they should be in traumatic shock. But humanity possesses a trait the archivists call transcendent stubbornness. When the first Goliath fired its disintegration cannon, the ground beneath it exploded. The humans weren't hiding in the buildings. They were in the mining tunnels, miles below the surface, and they had turned the settlement's core into a massive thermobaric trap. The impact of the explosion was so immense it shook my observation probe in orbit. Half of the Vahn invasion force was obliterated in a millisecond. And from the flames, through the black smoke choking the sun of Nadir, the humans marched again. They no longer had uniforms, only blood-soaked bandages and a thirst for retribution. That was when I realized the Vahn hadn't invaded a planet. They had kicked a nest of galactic hornets that wouldn't rest until every last Vahn knew the meaning of fear. The humiliation was just beginning, and the Vahn Empire, in its infinite arrogance, still thought this was just local resistance. They had no idea that Earth had already sent a message to the rest of their fleets. A message that contained only one word: retaliation. High Commander Vahn, whose name was unpronounceable to human vocal cords, but whom we might call Kalen, committed the second fatal mistake of his career. He dispatched a Level 3 pacification fleet. In Vahn doctrine, Level 3 is what you use to crush peasant revolts or extinguish species that haven't even discovered nuclear fission. He believed, with all the arrogance of his rank, that the explosion at New Hope was nothing more than a stroke of luck, the desperate final act of a cornered animal. My orbital sensors, however, were painting a very different picture. The humans weren't just surviving, they were adapting. And human adaptation, as I have come to learn, is a process that is violent, chaotic, and completely at odds with the laws of probability. As the Vahn fleet descended upon Nadir, their obsidian prism ships cutting through the sky, the humans had already abandoned the concept of defense. They had cracked the basic principles of the Vahn gravity engines, reverse engineering them under the absolute hell of enemy fire. Elias Thorne, the sergeant who should have died 10 times over on the first day, now led the remnants of the miners and a few light infantry units that had arrived in escape pods. They weren't just using drills anymore. They had scavenged Vahn power cells and jury-rigged them into their own assault rifles. The result was a hybrid weapon that fired tungsten rounds encased in a gravitational distortion field. It was the technological equivalent of strapping a jet engine to a wooden cart, and it functioned with terrifying efficiency. I watched, with all 3 of my eyes wide in disbelief, as the first Vahn landing barge attempted to touch down. On any other world, the natives would have fled or fired missiles that the shields would have flicked aside like dust. Thorne's humans waited. They waited for the moment the barge lowered its shields to begin deploying its elite troops. In that exact microsecond, the humans detonated subterranean charges that weren't explosive, they were magnetic. The raw magnetic field of Nadir was channeled through improvised copper coils, creating a pulse that scrambled the enemy ship's gravitational stabilizers. The barge, a miracle of millennia-old engineering, simply forgot how to float. It fell 50 meters, crushing the very troops it was supposed to deploy. What followed was a slaughter that defied military logic. The humans didn't wait for the dust to settle. They swarmed the wreckage before the ship's fire suppression systems could even activate. I saw Thorne leap onto a glowing metal plate, his patched-up armor throwing sparks, as he emptied his hybrid rifle into the Vahn survivors. The Imperial soldiers, beings who considered themselves the peak of evolutionary perfection, panicked. Their plasma rifles were useless against shadows moving through the ruins, shadows that struck with bayonets crafted from Vahn crystal shards. There was a coldness to human vengeance that I had never documented in 47 prior wars. They didn't scream battle hymns. They didn't ask for surrender. They simply eliminated, one by one, with surgical precision and a hatred that seemed to fuel their very biology. I saw a human medic named Sarah Miller, who had lost half her unit in the initial bombardment. She was out of ammunition. A Vahn officer, wounded and his chrome armor cracked, tried to crawl away. She caught him, not with a weapon, but with an emergency defibrillator. She didn't use it to save him. She used it to overload his armor's neural circuits, frying the alien's nervous system while staring directly into his visual sensors. There was no pleasure on her face, only the completion of a necessary task. A blood debt being paid with interest. Meanwhile, in orbit, the real surprise was arriving. The Vahn Empire maintained a strict blockade, but humans have a peculiar obsession with stealth technology. They didn't try to beat Vahn's sensors with sophistication. They beat them with raw simplicity. Earth's retaliation fleet didn't arrive with gleaming warships. They arrived in hundreds of small mining freighters, coated in thick layers of lead and cold ceramic, moving in absolute silence through the vacuum. They looked like space junk, debris from a previous battle. By the time the Vahn realized this trash was accelerating, it was already too late. The freighters didn't fire lasers, they were the ammunition. In a move the Vahn considered an act of collective insanity, the human captains pushed their warp drives to the limit inside the planet's gravity well. a move prohibited by every galactic navigation manual under penalty of death. They turned their ships into kinetic projectiles of near-infinite mass. The Vahn flagship, the Pride of Archon, was sliced clean in half by an ore hauler named the Brazuca. The impact didn't just destroy the ship, it created a gravitational shockwave that disabled the shields of the entire support fleet. It was in that moment that I received a broadcast on an open channel. It wasn't a plea for peace. It was the voice of Admiral Henderson, commander of the Retaliation Force. His voice was calm, almost bored, but it carried the weight of a world that had decided to stop being the victim. To the members of the Vahn Empire, he began. You came to our home, destroyed our cities, and killed our people because you thought we were small. Now we are here. We don't want your land, we don't want your technology, and we certainly don't want your surrender. We came for only one thing, to ensure you never forget the name of the species you tried to bury. The counterattack on Nadir, for wasn't a victory, it was an execution. In less than 12 standard hours, the pacification fleet Kalen had sent was reduced to orbital ash and terrestrial scrap. But the most disturbing thing to me as an observer wasn't the military defeat. It was the fact that the humans began painting the names of the New Hope victims onto the wreckage of the Vahn ships. They were launching the debris back into deep space, on trajectories that would lead them directly into the Empire's other systems. It was a postcard of terror. And as Thorne and his miners sat atop the remains of a Vahn Goliath to drink synthetic coffee, I realized the scale of this war had shifted. The Vahn still thought they were fighting for a planet. The humans were already fighting for the end of an empire. If the Vahn Empire thought the destruction of their fleet at Nadir, for was the peak of their humiliation, they had no idea of the dark creativity humanity reserves for those who try to exterminate them. As an archivist, I have studied species that, after winning a defensive battle, retreat to fortify their borders. The humans? They did the exact opposite. They took the wreckage of the Vahn ships, fused it to their own freighters, and in less than 72 hours, transformed a defense force into a makeshift invasion armada. They called this fleet the Iron Scrap, and their target wasn't just any outpost. It was Sector Ethelgard, the logistical heart of the Vahn Empire in that region of the galaxy. Ethelgard wasn't just a fortress, it was a monument to imperial arrogance. A space station the size of a small moon, surrounded by force fields capable of deflecting supernovas. The Vahn generals, recovering from the initial shock, laughed over the official communication channels. The monkeys are coming to the slaughterhouse, they said. But as I monitored everything from a safe distance, I began to see a pattern that the Vahn, in their obsession with logic and symmetry, were incapable of detecting. The humans weren't arriving in a battle formation. They were arriving as a swarm. Thousands of tiny vessels, many of them nothing more than oxygen pods with overpowered engines bolted onto them, dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously. There was no order. No clear flagship. It was motorized chaos. The Vahn targeting computers, designed to intercept sleek, predictable cruisers, simply suffered a logical collapse. How do you prioritize targets when 5,000 objects are screaming toward you, half of them literally trash containers filled with kinetic explosives, and the rest being human soldiers strapped to manually guided torpedoes? That was when I saw Sergeant Elias Thorne again. He wasn't on a command bridge. He was leading an assault group the humans called vacuum divers. They didn't try to knock down Ethelgard's shields from the outside. They used the Vahn's own warp technology, modified in a dangerous, unstable way, to blink their small ships inside the security perimeter, mere millimeters from the station's hull. It's a maneuver with a 90% chance of vaporizing the pilot. The humans did it with smiles on their faces and loud music blaring through their comms. The humiliation of an empire begins when its superior technology becomes a burden. Inside Ethelgard, the Chrome Legions were ready for heavy infantry combat. They expected clean corridors and flanking tactics. What they got were Thorne's men and women blowing out support walls, using industrial blowtorches to weld emergency doors shut, and turning the most advanced station in the galaxy into a maze of death traps. I watched Vahn's soldiers, trained for centuries in military academies, being snared by steel cable lassos or crushed by elevators that humans had hacked using consumer-grade tablets. There was one moment etched into my memory crystals as the ultimate symbol of the Vahn fall. The commander of the Ethelgard garrison, a Vahn aristocrat named Valerius, attempted to challenge Thorne to a formal duel over the station's loudspeaker system. He spoke of honor, of combat rituals, and the superiority of energy blades. Thorne, who was busy planting explosive charges on the sector's oxygen generator, simply replied, "I didn't come here to duel, you idiot. I came to break your stuff." 10 seconds later, Thorne used a grenade launcher to take out the supports of the walkway Valerius was standing on. The great Vahn commander didn't fall fighting. He fell like a bag of trash into a maintenance pit. Humanity wasn't just winning the physical battle, they were waging total psychological warfare. They began broadcasting the station's security footage to every core world in the Vahn Empire. They wanted every Imperial citizen to see their war gods running in panic from humans using pipe wrenches and duct tape to dismantle their technology. The message was clear: your empire is fragile, and we are the hammers. But the true humiliation occurred at the Ethelgard command center. When the humans finally seized the bridge, they didn't destroy the computers. They used them to upload a data virus to the rest of the Vahn fleet. It wasn't a virus that erased systems, it was something far worse. It replaced every navigation icon and every instruction manual with photos of the ruins of New Hope and the names of every human who died in the first attack. Vahn pilots, in the heat of combat, looked at their screens and saw no targets or coordinates. They saw the faces of those they had tried to erase from history. I saw fear spread like a wildfire. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Vahn Empire ordered a general retreat from an entire sector. They abandoned Ethelgard, their technological crown jewel, to the primitives. But before they left, the humans left one final gift. They didn't blow up the station. They painted it. Using maintenance drones and tons of industrial pigment, they covered the outer surface of Ethelgard with the flag of Earth and a Latin phrase that took my translator's hours to process. Nemo me impune laces sit. No one provokes me with impunity. The Empire retreated, but the human pursuit was only beginning. They had captured the Vahn star maps. They now knew where the nurseries, the factories, and the temples were located. And as the human scrap armada prepared for the next jump, I realized the narrator of this story had changed. I was no longer an observer of a resistance. I was the eyewitness to the systematic dismantling of a superpower. The humans didn't just want their territory back. They wanted the Vahn to feel, in every fiber of their being, the regret of ever setting foot on Nadir IV. The next stop was the Vahn home system, and what the humans planned to do there would make Ethelgard look like a courtesy call. The jump into the Vahn Prime system was the moment reality finally crashed through the walls of Imperial denial. Xylos followed the human iron scrap fleet in a state of documented trance. What I was witnessing wasn't just an invasion, it was a systematic desecration of everything the Vahn held sacred. The Vahn Prime system was shielded by the Star Womb, a defense satellite network that had stood for 10,000 years, untested simply because no one had ever been foolish enough to approach it. The Vahn believed their capital was untouchable. They believed the light of their star was a divine shield. They were about to discover that, to humans, a divine shield is just an engineering problem that hasn't been hit with enough explosives yet. The human strategy for invading the core system was insultingly simple. They didn't try to disable the defense satellites. Instead, they captured hundreds of Vahn supply freighters in neighboring systems, packed them with unstable fuel and metallic debris, and launched them on blind ballistic trajectories toward the Star Womb. The Vahn satellites, programmed to identify threats based on energy signatures and warship profiles, ignored the freighters, tagging them as friendly. When the humans detonated the charges remotely, the defense grid wasn't just destroyed, it was transformed into a massive shrapnel cloud that acted like giant sandpaper, shredding the very orbital stations it was meant to protect. In 1 hour, the most expensive defense system in galactic history was reduced to decorative space dust. The descent onto Vahn Prime was a masterclass in psychological terror. The humans didn't target the factories or the military bases first. They aimed for the pillars of light, the kilometer-high towers where the Vahn elite lived above the clouds, insulated from the commoners and the realities of the galaxy. I watched Sergeant Elias Thorne lead an orbital drop that would make a suicide pilot hesitate. They used insertion pods that lacked conventional heat shields. Instead, they used salvaged Vahn armor plates that still bore the noble crests of the Empire. Imagine the shock of the Vahn Prime citizens, seeing the symbols of their own lords falling from the sky like avenging meteors. When Thorne's boots hit the pristine marble of the Plaza of Ascension, the political heart of the Empire, he didn't open fire on the crowd. He did something far worse. He installed a high-power transmitter atop the statue of the first Vahn Emperor. Instead of war hymns, The transmitter began broadcasting something humans call office ambience. The sound of people typing, phones ringing, and the mundane chatter of an Earth city the Vahn had tried to destroy. It was a terrifying subliminal message. We are still here. Our daily lives continue, while yours are about to end. The humiliation reached its peak when the Vahn High Council tried to mobilize the Praetorian Guard, the most decorated military unit in the Empire. These warriors wore armor that was a work of art, plated in gold and equipped with the most advanced combat AIs. Thorne and his wraiths met them in the palace's hanging gardens. But the humans didn't fight honorably. They used smoke grenades made from burnt rubber and industrial chemicals that blinded the refined optical sensors of the Praetorian suits. I watched the golden gods of the Empire stumbling through black smoke while humans covered in mud and grease tackled them, using combat knives to pierce the joints of armor worth millions of credits. Thorne, in a move of absolute audacity, captured the leader of the Praetorian Guard alive. He didn't execute him. He forced him to record a surrender message using a broken universal translator, which made the proud warrior's voice sound like a whimpering child. This recording was played on a loop across every entertainment channel on the planet. The image of imperial perfection was shattered. The Vahn people, who had always believed themselves invincible, saw their greatest defender kneeling before a human sergeant with a dirty bandage on his forehead and an unlit cigarette in the corner of his mouth. What the Vahn failed to understand was that human vengeance isn't just about pain, it's about demythologizing the enemy. The humans were systematically proving that the Vahn were just people, arrogant, slow, and far too dependent on their technology. In the streets of the capital, I saw Vahn civilians hiding in their luxury bunkers, while humans confiscated their levitation vehicles to transport medical supplies for the human wounded. There was no widespread looting or indiscriminate massacre. There was something far more humiliating: indifference. The humans treated the Vahn not as worthy enemies, but as an annoying obstacle that needed to be cleared so the job could get done. High Commander Kalen, the man who started it all at New Hope, was locked in the iron bunker beneath the palace. He sent a desperate plea for a ceasefire, offering trillions in credits and half the Empire's star systems. Thorne's response, sent on behalf of Earth Command, was merely a scanned photo of a drawing made by a child in New Hope, showing a smiling sun and a house that no longer existed. On the back of the photo was written, "The price of the house is your empire." That night, the capital of Vahn Prime didn't burn from bombs, but from shame. I saw Vahn generals tearing off their insignias and deserting, realizing no logic could defeat the raw persistence of humanity. The humans had made the war personal. They didn't want the Vahn to surrender, they wanted them to be obsolete. And as I watched Thorne sitting on the Emperor's crystal throne, cleaning his weapon as if he were on a porch in any Earth suburb, I understood the final lesson of Nadir 4. Humanity doesn't fight to be respected. They fight so that the enemy never dares to look at the stars and think they are alone again. The Vahn Empire was dead, not because its ships were gone, but because its soul had been crushed by the weight of a vengeance they invited upon themselves. What happens when a 10,000-year empire loses not just its fleet, but its very reason for being? I, Xylos, walked through the human hospital ships and the temporary detention centers on Vahn Prime, and I witnessed a phenomenon no archivist had ever recorded. The humans weren't celebrating with grand military parades or mass executions. Instead, they were doing something that, to the Vahn's psyche, was infinitely more painful. They were treating the Empire like a bankrupt corporation in need of new management. The so-called Treaty of Nadir wasn't signed on a golden table. It was signed on the hood of a dusty human military jeep, parked right in front of the smoking ruins of the Great Vahn Archive. The first clause of the treaty was a death blow to imperial dignity. The humans didn't demand immediate total disarmament. Instead, they demanded that every soldier of the Praetorian Guard, the proudest beings in the galaxy, swap their shimmering chrome armor for orange work jumpsuits. They were sent to Nadir 4, the very planet they had tried to destroy, to work on the reconstruction of New Hope. Not as chained slaves, but as hourly laborers under the supervision of human foremen who, just weeks earlier, they had considered vermin. Imagine the humiliation of a Vahn gravity master being lectured by a guy from Earth on how to properly lay ceramic bricks for a school wall. This was the dark genius of human revenge. They turned the conquerors into the janitors of their own destruction. Meanwhile, on Vahn Prime, the human occupation took on a surreal tone. Thorne's wraiths turned the Temple of Eternal Radiance, the Empire's holiest site, into a logistics hub for food distribution. I saw Vahn priests, who claimed to speak for the stars, forced to wait in line for emergency rations branded with the logo of an Earth-based fast food chain. The humans began demystifying Vahn culture with terrifying efficiency. They opened the secret libraries to the public, revealing that the great imperial breakthroughs weren't divine gifts, but technologies stolen from extinct species. Within days, the aura of Vahn's superiority wasn't just broken, it was ridiculed. The fate of High Commander Kalen was the moment I realized human revenge is a form of dark art. Thorne didn't take him to a traditional war crimes tribunal. He took him back to the ruins of the city Kalen had flattened with his gravity anchors. There, in the middle of nowhere, the humans had preserved a single interrogation room, made of cheap metal and lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb. Thorne sat across from Kalen, not as a victor, but as an exhausted man. He didn't scream. He simply placed a headset on the alien and forced him to listen to an infinite loop of the goodbye messages the families of New Hope had sent to each other before they died. "You thought you were cleaning up trash," Thorne said, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "But you were killing people with names, with stories. Now, you're going to stay here until you know every single one of them." Kalen, a being who saw himself as a god, was reduced to a trembling figure, forced to confront the humanity he tried to ignore. He wasn't executed. He was condemned to live in a small house built atop the wreckage of his own fleet, on a planet that now belonged to those he despised. Death would have been an easy exit. Life under the constant gaze of those he tried to exterminate was the true hell. The humiliation extended to the very framework of the galaxy. The humans began selling captured Imperial ships to the smaller species the Vahn had oppressed for centuries. Suddenly, the space lanes were filled with Imperial hulls painted in vibrant colors, carrying cheap trade goods and tourists. Technology that once inspired terror was now used for mundane commerce. Humanity didn't just want the Vahn military gone. They wanted the Vahn myth dead. They wanted 1,000 years to pass and have no one remember the Vahn as conquerors, but only as the species that made the mistake of irritating humans and ended up selling trinkets on the frontier. I asked Thorne one night, as he watched the last human troop transports leave Vahn Prime, if he was satisfied. He looked at the stars and took a long breath. Satisfied? No, Xylos. Nothing brings New Hope back. But now, every time a galactic bully looks at a small, unprotected planet, they're going to remember what happened here. They're going to wonder if it's worth the risk. If we saved just one other world from going through what we did, then maybe it was all worth it. That was when I realized human revenge wasn't motivated by sadism, but by a violent corrective justice. They humiliated the Empire not because they could, but because they needed to ensure the universe learned the lesson. Humanity can be ignored, underestimated, and even hurt, but they will never, ever be erased. The Vahn Empire was no longer an empire. It was a human protectorate, a shadow of itself serving as an eternal warning. The silence that followed the official collapse of the Vahn Empire was not the silence of death, but the silence of a traumatic revelation that would echo across every quadrant of the known universe. I, Xylos, stayed on Vahn Prime long enough to see the last human freighter break atmosphere. They didn't leave a permanent occupation force. They didn't install a puppet government. They simply gathered their dead, packed their tools, and left. To any other species, this would seem like a colossal strategic blunder. To the humans, it was the necessary period at the end of the sentence. They hadn't come to inherit an empire. They had come to disintegrate the very idea that an empire could exist at their expense. What remained behind was a Vahn civilization that, for the first time in 10 millennia, had to look in the mirror and see not a god, but a broken, humbled survivor. The galaxy shifted the moment those human ships jumped back to the solar system. Other empires, like the Kryn and the Syndic, who had been watching from the shadows, waiting to carve up the Vahn's remains, hesitated. They saw what happened to the greatest military power in the sector and realized that the old tactics of conquest would never work against Earth. Humanity had introduced a new variable into galactic politics: total asymmetrical retaliation. The final report I sent to the Great Glass Archive contained no casualty tables or projectile trajectory analyses. It held a single footnote that read, "Humanity is the galaxy's immune system against arrogance. If you attack them, they won't just fight back, they will alter your reality until you are incapable of ever attacking again." I saw Sergeant Elias Thorne one last time before he departed. He was sitting on the boarding ramp of his ship, watching the lights of Vahn Prime begin to flicker back on as infrastructure resumed under the control of the new local caretakers. He looked older than his biology should allow. Vengeance, though satisfying in its execution, leaves scars that even the most crushing victory cannot heal. Xylos, he told me, his eyes never leaving the alien horizon. The problem with being the guy who won't die is that you have to live with everything you saw while you were trying not to. The Vahn will recover, maybe in 1,000 years. But they'll never smile at the sky again. And me? I just want somewhere where the ground doesn't shake and the coffee doesn't taste like gunpowder. The ultimate humiliation for the Vahn was seeing their technology, once a source of cosmic dread, distributed for free by the humans to smaller species the Vahn had treated as beasts of burden for centuries. In less than one standard cycle, Imperial gravity engines were being used on tractors in farming colonies and in water purification systems on desert worlds. Humanity turned an empire's arsenal into gardening tools for the galaxy. There was no greater insult to the chrome-clad generals than seeing their legacy of war used to plant potatoes. And the humans did it with a generosity that bordered on mockery. They were telling the universe, "This thing you feared so much? To us, it's just useful scrap." Today, centuries after the events of New Hope and the fall of Vahn Prime, the region is known as the Memory Belt. The humans never fully rebuilt the cities the Vahn destroyed. They left them as monuments, not to their victory, but to the cost of aggression. Travelers from every system come to see the ruins of New Hope, where Thorne's thermal drill is still driven into the pedestal of the central square, now surrounded by flowers that shouldn't be able to grow in that soil. It is a silent reminder. The Vahn are now a peaceful, almost reclusive species whose youth study human history with a mix of terror and awe. They learned the hardest lesson of all. You can kill a human, you can burn their home, and you might even think you've won. But as long as a single one of them is breathing, the debt is still open. And humans are the galaxy's finest accountants when it comes to collecting interest on blood. My mission as an observer has ended. I leave this record in the archives of the Zenith Imperium channel, so that future generations understand that diplomacy with Earth is not just a political choice, it is a survival imperative. They do not seek war, they do not covet what is yours, and they would much rather be left alone on their small blue dot. But if you force them out, if you compel them to become what they were at Vahn Prime, there is no empire large enough to protect you. They don't die. They don't quit. And as the Vahn Empire discovered too late, they always, invariably, get their revenge. This was the account of Xylos the Archivist, regarding the day the universe learned to fear the silence of a wounded human. The story of humanity among the stars is far from over, but one chapter is crystal clear. The age of tyrant empires ended the moment Elias Thorne refused to die in a ditch on Nadir IV. May the starlight guide your path, and may your wisdom be greater than that of the Vahn. Until the next chronicle.